All right, and we got the official cue. We're being recorded. All right. Thank you, Rich, for joining. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm just going to give like a very quick kind of synopsis. We're here to get to know Rich, to get to know his creative practice, and to really get to know his journey post graduating from college. I'm a big advocate for arts business, and I'm a big advocate for trying to figure out all the nuts and bolts of all those little things that we don't necessarily know, work, money, negotiations, like what does this really look like? So it's going to be great to learn from all these different artists, and I'm excited to have Rich with us first. So I promise you, this is a totally raw conversation. Rich and I have not spoke before purposefully, just to make sure we keep everything brand new for all of you. John's going to be keeping track of questions. So if you have any questions, go ahead and drop them in the chat. And the last 15 minutes we'll save for Q&A. All right. All right. So Rich, let me know, when did you graduate?
Okay, so I graduated in 2014. So I started in 2010 to 2014.
Okay. And that was your undergrad?
Undergrad, yep.
Okay. And what did you study at Stamps?
So I did a Bachelor of Fine Arts, and I kind of specified working in animation, like any sort of experimental animation classes. There was a class with Alona Van Gent at the time that was actually like 2 semesters where we'd actually make an entire like short. So the first semester was all like the pre-production stuff, storyboarding, and all that. And then we actually animated it and put out a full short.
Nice.
And then I also took like some illustration classes and things like that. Those were all the electives, because obviously like at Stamps, we have a lot of stuff we do where it's like learning the basics of like drawing, clay, wood, metals, all that kind of stuff.
Sure. And as we all know, Stamps is definitely more on the interdisciplinary side. So you were doing lots of different art. So at what point did you know what is it that you want to do when you graduate? Did you know that going in, or did it take a little while, into your program for you to figure out what was kind of your dream job?
Right. It did take a little bit, because I went BFA and then I went to a BA for like a semester and then back to BFA. I went in thinking, okay, I'm going to kind of take this first year, just take all these classes, kind of learn whatever comes at me. And then I was starting to think, maybe I'll do graphic design. So I realized really quickly I was terrible at graphic design. I was like, oh man, I can't stand this. Yeah. And I started seeing the animation classes, and I just couldn't escape that feeling. Because like when I was younger, I was always doing stop motion animations and just watching a lot of animation. So going in, I definitely knew that I kind of felt like there was always that thing kind of hanging there that was like, you should try for animation. And once I got to right after my junior year, I got an internship at Nickelodeon. And that kind of helped really solidify that I wanted to be in animation. So I started like my senior thesis, I did an entire like animated short. I did another animated short, but that was just me. And it was like a little kid who's experiencing or like using his imagination, trying on different hats and taking him to different worlds. That was kind of the idea.
Very cool. Tell us about the internship. So you did that as a junior at Stamps. How did you get that internship?
So I always tell people whenever I've been visiting like University of Michigan or whatever, I'm always like, John Luther helped me so much. So John was like, John's so good about like, how's your resume? Let's go over that. Let's look at opportunities, how to format your resume, and what people are looking for. And I really was really wanted to learn, how to make myself appeal to a studio. Hireable. And so I also got some encouragement from John and like Brian Banks to look at, jobs at like the Duderstadt. And so I ended up working at the time. They had like the 3D lab. I haven't been there in a while, so I'm not sure. But the 3D lab, we were doing like 3D printing and modeling, and we were working on a video game at the time that was had to do with people with like spinal cord injuries. It was kind of based on that, and so I was learning coding and all that stuff. So I think having that on my resume and then showing that I had been like, really studying animation helped with Nickelodeon seeing me as a hireable candidate.
Right. That makes sense. Was the application process a lot, or was it just kind of like a basic job application?
It was it was pretty much a basic job application where there was like resume, cover letter, and obviously I didn't have much to show at that point,
Work-wise.
besides, because like they really just wanted to know if you were interested. So like I should, I did have like a website at that time. So I was, I showed them that I had some 3D modeling stuff. It was just kind of a whole range of things, not like anything specific. So they ended up putting me, it was like a 2 interview process where I did the first interview with HR, and then they passed me onto the show, and then the show interviewed me. And they ended up putting me on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which was super fun. And
Nice.
my job title was CG intern. So I was basically, it's funny because you're an intern, but you're kind of more there to learn rather than you are to help them work,
Right.
So it was very much like, hey, come in this meeting, see how we do this thing, see how we do a CG show as opposed to a 2D show. But then I would do things, where I'd be helping them get scripts ready for records or label storyboard panels and things like that.
Right. I love that. There are some things that you mentioned that I really want to highlight. So internships are huge, y'all.
Yeah.
Like, and internships, I personally think that they're easier to get while you are a student. I don't think they're out of the question when you're no longer a student, but it's definitely easier to get it while you are a student. I think it's definitely worth highlighting, you didn't have much experience to show, but like you were saying, you were really there more to learn than to help them. And that's reason enough. And even if animation wasn't what you wanted to do, at least you would have had that experience to tell you, opposed to waiting until you graduated, maybe getting a job in that, and then figuring out, oh, I need to do a 360, like this isn't it. And then milking those resources that you had with John. Stamps in particular has, John is the keeper of all things job related, resume related, cover letter related. But all of those things are optional, right? You're not necessarily mandated to knock on his door and to have those appointments. So that's definitely something that, kudos to you for taking that charge, and for going to him for help and seeking that. Let's talk about money.
Let's talk about money.
what were you doing as a student? Were you on scholarships? Were your parents helping you? What was,
my parents and grandparents helped me, which was
awesome.
a huge blessing. And but I did, to kind of cover just basic college expenses, like going out with friends to eat, or like even just like, things like books or whatever kind of expenses would come up for art projects. I was working, so I did the Deuterstat, and then almost every semester I would have some kind of like university job. Like I did facilities for the psychology department over a summer once. And then I did what was the other job I did it was similar to that. It was another like kind of facilities job. And then working at the Deuterstat, I would do that like twice a week, and it wasn't much, but it was enough to like, to help me just
gaps.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Be a little bit more social.
Yeah.
So when you graduated, at the point of graduation, did you have any job offers? Had you been applying to jobs? What was kind of your status by the time you graduated?
I had been applying, and there was a small animation or like a advertising studio that gave me an interview like a month before I graduated. And I didn't have, I just didn't really have the skill of like what they needed from me. I was sort of just I was applying everywhere, I think by the time I had actually gotten a job, I had applied to something like 250 jobs, like just from like every day, just anything.
And what kind of job titles were you looking at specifically?
Well, I started off looking at like junior animator, assistant animators, and things like it was almost only specifically animation jobs. And so by the time I graduated, I ended up I went back home for about 6 months. And during those 6 months, I was working on a golf course that I used to work in between years at school on the summers. And it was a long, exhausting process because I would pretty much get up at 5, go work at the golf course until 2 or 3, come home and apply for jobs until dinner, and then do it all again. That was just my routine for the whole time. I mean, it was a good summer. I got to spend it with my parents and my grandparents, that last hurrah before I moved off to California. But when I actually, by the time I actually got my job, I had kind of shifted my focus from looking at animation specific jobs, like kind of almost reaching a little bit too high for my experience, to looking at production assistant jobs.
Okay. What's
You know,
could you describe the difference?
Yeah, so like a production assistant is sort of a foot in the door position where you're gonna come in, you know, it's almost like a glorified intern. You're gonna learn to take notes, be in screenings, um, and kind of like help the whole pipeline just run smoothly. But it's a very technical job, you know,
Okay.
scheduling, things like that, budgets, things, you know.
Okay. So nothing creative.
Right. Yeah. Nothing creative. And that was the thing, is that I felt like such a hot shot coming out of school. I was like, I got my internship at Nickelodeon. I made an animated short. And I went to SIGGRAPH, which is a Vancouver based like animation and computer festival.
Okay.
And most humbling experience of my life, where I walked in feeling really confident. And all of a sudden I see all these people who went to like Ringling College of Art and Design and SCAD and Cal Arts, who were phenomenal animators already. And so I go in there and I'm talking to people at Disney and Nickelodeon and DreamWorks, and they're like, it's just not good enough. You know, it's like, you need to like go study animation. And I was so bummed out. So I eventually, so the second day, I'm in there again, kind of tail between my legs. I'm just like, oh gosh, this is rough. And I find this small booth, and it was called Arc Productions. They're a Canadian studio, really small Canadian studio. But I knew about them because of an animation that I used to help inspire my short film, my senior thesis. So I go up to the guy, I talk to him, and I say, hey, can you look at my reel? I was like, this is what everybody's saying. And he looks at it and he says pretty much the same thing. He's like, it's not at the quality that we would need. He said, like, you have a good like range, because I had stop motion and all this stuff. But he's like, but it's not the kind of stuff they look for. And then he told me his little story about getting into production, and how production helped him kind of like continue to learn from the inside. You know, like he was around creatives all day. And that was the thing I had to kind of break in my mind, is that like, okay, school, while it was super useful and I use it every day now, you know, my job, it was the first step, but there was another step to learning from people who have been in the industry for a long time.
Right.
And so once I actually changed my focus, it was 2 weeks later that I got my interview with DreamWorks and then landed the job. So I started applying to production jobs. And then after I accepted my job at DreamWorks, 3 more of those job applications came back and they called me. So it was interesting to see how that kind of shift in focus, where I was like, okay, maybe this learning journey isn't done yet. You know, there's some more steps to take. And I really did learn a lot once I got into the job. And now I've kind of combined all of that learning experience into what I'm doing now.
So after that event, you would apply to be a production assistant at DreamWorks?
Right. Yeah. Instead of like a junior animator position, which was just a little bit beyond my ability, you know.
Okay. And what's your home state?
Home state is I would say it's Michigan. I'm from Texas originally. Like I was born in Texas and we lived there for a few years, but Michigan's where I grew up.
Okay. So what was that? So you've got the production assistant job at DreamWorks. What was that move from Michigan to now California? What was that adjustment? How did you afford that move?
Yeah.
What was the living situation?
Yeah, so once I got the job, I was on the golf course with my grandpa. We were golfing. I just gotten off. They called me and they said, hey, we want you to have this job. Can you be here in a week and a half? And I was like, oh my gosh. I was like, yeah, I mean, I guess I'm not going to say no. So,
right.
So I packed up 2 suitcases, got on a plane, and I stayed in a hotel for like a week and a half. And by that point I had pretty much spent all my money on everything, you know, from the summer. I was pretty much broke. So waiting for that first paycheck. And finally, when that came through, I went and got an apartment, just a really small studio apartment, walking distance, because I didn't have a car. And my whole world was just within like a 1 mile radius. You know, I was like work, that, and then I would take a bus to church, or I would take, you know, to see friends, I'd take an Uber or whatever. But it was a little bit daunting, just because you know, especially Los Angeles is such a big city, and it feels very much like a different world than what I was ever used to. I was in Texas. We lived in New York when I was a kid, but like on Long Island, you know, so like I've always been in these kind of small pocket areas, and right. This is the first time I was by myself in a big city. But DreamWorks really did become a small family, like my little crew there. They immediately, they were so helpful, I think, because everybody knows that experience. So like one of my good friends, Lowell, I'd known him for like, 5 days or something like that. He's like, hey, do you need me to drive you around a couple places to look at apartments? Like, yeah, that sounds great. I was like, please.
Oh, nice.
And, so I really did have to start kind of from the ground up. But it was really like, I look back on it so fondly. It was such a great experience. I'm so thankful for those days, kind of like, living on ham sandwiches kind of thing.
Now, the production assistant job was definitely the foot into the door, and clearly that worked because you're still there. But so what did that job offer come with a set salary? Was that hourly? What was that like? What should people know realistically, for a production assistant type of job?
Yeah, so it was an hourly position. And when I first got the job, I didn't really like play the game too much. But I did say, is this a negotiable process? And they said, let us ask. And so they called me back later and said, for production assistants, it's set. Like, it's like your hourly rate is.
At least you asked.
Yeah, right. Because I wanted to make sure, just in case, I still had a little bit of that University of Michigan graduating pride, So, but so I said, and I think the rate at the time was like $13.50 an hour, and which in Los Angeles is really tough, just because that like pretty much one paycheck I would get didn't even cover all of my rent. You know what I mean? So it was that kind of thing. But the nice thing about DreamWorks though was that they didn't really just hang you out to dry. It wasn't like they were there to use you. They really wanted to find how to place you. So as soon as I probably I'd say like 6 months into the job, they brought me into the office and said, so what's your goal here? Like, what do you think you're going to be the most useful for the company?
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. And so they'd say like, do you want to be in production? And you always felt kind of funny because like you're talking to your production bosses and you're like, no. And so I'd say, but the thing was that like when I went to Nickelodeon, the job that I'm in now, I didn't know existed really until I had that internship. So animatic editing, which is editing storyboards, like, a rough pass of an episode, didn't know that was a thing. So when I got to DreamWorks, I was really interested in that part of the process because that was part of my job, was to sit in on those meetings and take notes. And so I said to them, I'm really interested in what animatic editors do. Give me any chance I can to learn from them. Give me a test. Let me try to edit something, even if it's like, we used to do these like thank you videos for our partner studios where we just be like, hey, thanks, and do all this like go around the I just say, let me edit that. Let me try it, put music to it, sound effects, whatever it is.
Nice.
Yeah.
So they said yes to that.
Yeah. They were like, okay, yeah, we'll see what we can do. I mean, because they would do that for like, if anybody wanted to do a storyboard test, they would give them, say like, here's a script, go storyboard this, and then a director would meet with them. So like everybody's very willing to meet and to give notes and to really try to place you. I mean, it took a lot of people a long time, I mean, like I felt like I was blessed enough to have a lot of opportunities fall quickly, but I didn't feel rushed. But a lot of people it takes time, but they would, especially for storyboarding, because it's a really tough job. But they were so adamant about really placing you where they thought you'd be most effective, which is really cool.
So you were in the production assistant role for about 6 months?
No, so I was in the production assistant role for a year, and then I got promoted to a production coordinator for another 5 months.
Okay.
And during that time, that show said, we don't have an editor on the show. Do you want to do you want us to do a test? So I did that. There were some complications with HR. They said, okay, we can't hire you, but we are going to recommend you for this. Like, go talk to this person. And I eventually got hired on Puss in Boots as their assistant editor.
Okay.
So that was after I started. That was about a year and a half after I had started at DreamWorks.
Okay. And what did you do in that role?
For the assistant, the editing assistant?
Yeah, with Puss in Boots.
Yeah. So that was really cool because this isn't always how it goes, but most of your job is you're importing the storyboards into the Adobe Premiere, editing software. You're putting in sound effects for the editors, and you're doing a lot of things where you're kind of like tedious things where you're like marking every cut so that we can send individual shots to the studios. But I had 2 editors who were really adamant about teaching. So like they'd be like, hey, what are you doing right now? And I'd say, got nothing on my plate. They'd say, come into the office. So I'd be in the office with the director, the producer, and then the editor. And we just like sit there, and half the time we just talk about editing or filmmaking, and then the other half we'd actually be working. And it was really
Nice.
cool to be in that environment where there was the work and play aspect of it, and I was, again, like learning from people who have been doing it for 20 plus years, which was super helpful for me. And I feel like not everybody gets that opportunity as an assistant editor, because a lot of the job is you're just busy all the time, like breaking down dialogue, labeling things. But I had the opportunity where they actually wanted me to edit, which was really, really helpful for when I actually got my first lead editor job, to kind of jump in and understand, here's how you interact with the director. Here's how you cut these things, the speed of how you work to make sure that you're not holding up production and all that kind of thing.
Nice. So what role did you move into after the work you did on Puss in Boots?
So what happened was, right at the end of Puss in Boots, the funny thing is, like, you're not really ever, like, I'm not a contracted employee. I'm pretty much just there until they don't need me. So I would, everything was hourly. And so they would say to you, hey, your end date is coming up. Talk to this person about if there are any opportunities. And thankfully, I've always had an opportunity, because DreamWorks has always had a lot of projects moving. And so they said, we're going to put you on another assistant position, but there's another show coming up that's hasn't been greenlit yet. It's in the early stages. And then they just wanted to test you out to see if you might be a good fit for them to pitch to Netflix. So that was Kipo. It was a show called Kipo and the Age of Wonder Beasts. And so I moved on to a preschool How to Train Your Dragon show as an assistant, but I would work at nights with this guy, Rad Seacrest, and Bill Wolkoff, who were the showrunners. And we would work at night, and we kind of built like a 5-scene pitch, and we sent that to Netflix. They approved it. They greenlit it, bought it from DreamWorks. And then it was like, I guess from the time I started Puss in Boots, it was like a year and a half later that I got promoted to a lead editor for Kipo, and then we did that show.
Nice.
So then, since then, I did Kipo, and then I did Jurassic World Camp Cretaceous, which just came out. And then I just jumped over from TV to feature. So I'm back to being an assistant, but I'm a feature assistant now. So we're working on some like unannounced movie projects, which has been pretty fun.
Okay, so assistant, but kind of higher level content.
It's kind of, I mean, like, I guess like pay grade, it's the same.
Yeah.
But I am going back to doing, again, like dialogue breakdowns and things like that. But I'm trying to learn now the feature pipeline, and kind of learn, since I've never done that. I've been in TV, episodic this whole time. It's a much different pace. It's much slower, but also somehow more busy. It's like you have more time to work on things, but you're always just going.
There's always something.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Okay, so I want to go back to something that you said. You're not a contract employee working for DreamWorks. Everything is hourly. So at any point, and I, like you said, you've definitely been blessed that, and it's great that they're even triggering you to be like, hey, this is about to end. Go talk to somebody. Hey, go find something else for yourself. So I guess, how have you seen situations where there isn't something else and somebody has to go? Or how are you kind of preparing for that potential situation, seeing that you're not salary and the moment that they don't need you or you finish a big project, if there's one day there might not be something else?
Yeah. So I have definitely seen that, because people, like, it's funny how you'll see like somebody you haven't seen in a long time, and all of a sudden they'll come back and like, where have you been? Like, oh, Nickelodeon. And then they're like, then that show ended and I came back, so
okay.
People kind of bounce around, especially in TV. It's like they bounce around from like Nickelodeon to Disney to DreamWorks to Warner Brothers to Cartoon Network, and kind of around the circle, just based on where there's work. And you don't, like, some people, like the editors I had did get contracts, but they were also really early on in DreamWorks TV, and they kind of stopped giving out contracts, I think, just because of the nature of streaming. Like, streaming's a really fast turnover, really fast, it's different than any other kind of TV thing where you're not really waiting to get picked up. Netflix is ordering like 75 episodes and then they're done, So, but I think, like, to answer your question about like what I'm doing to prepare for that, if that happens, because of the way that people bounce around, you kind of always know someone at a studio if you're good at networking within. You kind of never stop networking.
Right.
So like a lot of the people, there are people I worked with who I had a great working relationship with who are now at Nickelodeon. And so I have kind of like a list, kind of like, that I keep on in my mind of like, here's what I'm listening to go down if I end up rolling off the show and don't have any work, um, just trying to make sure that I'm always have that backup plan. And sometimes I think about, like, would I go back to being a TV assistant if I had to take the work? And I probably would. But the nice thing is, I think working with all of these people from the past is that it's been in an editorial capacity. So they know I can edit. They know that we can work together in that way. And so I've never really I'm never really, too nervous about it. Because I feel like I've made those connections.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Are some of those networking skills you picked up in school, or what's something that's been helping you from undergrad to professional life in terms of keeping up with networking and that kind of stuff?
That's a good question. I mean, I think because like in school, that was definitely, the things I feel like we learned from like our career advisors or our academic advisors were, how to do resumes, and then how to like, interact with like people. They always encourage, like I remember, I never actually took the opportunity to do this, but whenever they did like the Stamps lecture series, they would have students who could like, sign up to like meet with the artist who was speaking,
Yes.
and so they always I feel like Stamps was really good.
That was my favorite part.
Yeah, right. And I'm mad at myself because like I remember they had the artist Pez, who was a stop motion artist, come, and I remember thinking, why didn't I sign up for that? I was so mad, I was kicking myself because I'm like, I love his stuff. He's so cool. But I think Stamps always did a good job at encouraging, like, make sure you're talking to people, looking for those opportunities. I mean, because eventually that kind of becomes everything. I hate to say it like that, but like who it's how you've interacted with people, how you because they're going to know your work. And so I think just being at DreamWorks and being an amicable person with is always, people always say like the biggest thing is they want someone who's easy to work with. So trying to still be give creative input, kind of fight for my ideas if I feel like it's appropriate, but also working well with people and being easy to work with.
As you were in those different roles, and especially just starting out, how did you kind of negotiate when to speak, or like when to say too much, or to maybe reserve, or maybe who you shared with and who you didn't? How did you, what were those kind of senses? How did you figure that out?
Yeah, that's good. A lot of it's just it's like reading people. When I was on Puss in Boots, and I started to kind of get the hang of editing, and I was starting to understand it, and I was sitting there with the director, our producer Lane, who's this guy who worked on like the Iron Giant, who's been around forever, incredible animator, great director, and he was producing Puss in Boots, and he was just a very no ego, he would just ask people, hey, what do you think of this? Like what do you like? Give me a note. But he always but he would make fun of you if it wasn't good. Like he said, like he wanted to make sure that you had something to say, so he would say like, got to the point where I'd be walking by and he just said, Rich, get in here. And I'd walk in and be like, what do you think of this? And I'd be like, I don't like it that way. I would do it this way. And he'd be like, no, you're insane. I started realizing he actually wants to know, and he wants me to kind of like fight for my position, but then it's funny because like when I was actually a lead editor on Jurassic, I had another boss who was great. This isn't like a problem or anything, but he was much more like, I want it this way, and this way. And I could just tell that it was like, this is not for me to decide on this or give me, I'm going to give an opinion if he asks for one.
Right.
But on Kipo, because I was one of the original guys who helped with the show, I felt much more comfortable saying, why don't we try it this way? Even though it wasn't my final say, I felt like I had some creative input that I felt comfortable with these guys to actually talk with them, because we had a little more of a working relationship where we were all kind of give and take.
Nice. So how many years in total have you been with DreamWorks now?
I've been with DreamWorks 6 years now. Yeah, I guess over 6 years, like 6 years and 2 or 3 months.
Would you say that this is your dream job, or do you feel like you still have some levels you'd like to reach?
That's a good question. It's interesting because now that I've gone back to being an assistant, it's a little bit of a struggle. I had to, again, it's like the pride thing kind of coming up again, where I'm like, oh, I was an editor before, I was an editor. And like my job on Kipo, like I was on top of the world. I was just like, this is what I've always wanted to do. I'm working in animation. I'm on an animated show. It's original. It's cool. It's relevant. It's unique. And it was so fun. And I feel like I'm now kind of back in that learning process because I'm trying to learn again, like, remember that I'm still young and I'm still a small fish in a big pond. And now I'm learning feature, which is like where the big dogs are, the guys who've worked for 30 plus years, who've been there since Shrek, when I was a kid. But I mean, I think overall though, I would say I am working my dream job in that I'm in animation every day. I'm working on some fun franchise things I knew growing up, and which is really fun. So there's still some, I feel like I'm always, just with who I am, I'm always looking for that next fun thing, fun thing to try. And I feel like kind of working my way towards feature editing is like the next big thing, I guess. But I'm also really just trying to take in, where I am now and just enjoy this part of the ride.
Nice.
Yeah.
We've got a little bit more time before Q&A starts. I'd love to ask, at what point, and if you haven't reached that point, that's fine, but at what point did you feel like, okay, I can handle myself financially? Like, I don't need mom and dad's help anymore. I don't need my grandparents' help. Like, thank you all for supporting me in this transition, but I've got it now. I'm out here in California living my life.
Yeah. I think, as far as I can remember, I tried my best as soon as I moved out, not to ask my parents for money. And I think my mom's probably listening to this right now, but I can't remember if that's true or not. But I remember trying to just live frugally, So like,
Sure.
Even though those, like, that first check didn't even cover rent, I would just only deal with the necessities. So I didn't get a car until a year and a half or 2 years in, when I actually had a little more money. And it was funny how when I got my promotion to a coordinator and I made a little more money, I ended up somehow being tighter on cash. I think because I got a car registration, gas out here are insane. Right. But I definitely, once I got my lead editor position, was much more comfortable. But I also was, at that point, I was like, okay, I don't want to get so comfortable that I'm not prepared for the future. So I started trying to see, okay, how much do I need to live without a problem? And then everything else, investment and savings. And especially because like we were talking about, I never know when my job is going to end. Right. I don't know when.
And you're still going to need to pay rent and feed yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And, out here, you've got like a studio apartment's like $1,300 a month. So you have to really, prepare for yourself. So I think it was, and that was something I learned though, after a while, because I was, once I had my Kipo job, I'm like, oh, I'm going to go spend all this money and do this thing. Like one of my things I do is I love playing guitar, and that's a huge expense to buy a new guitar. And so I bought one, and then I was like, okay, I need to slow down. It's like, I don't have something to pad me if so I started investing and making sure that I was, thinking more forward minded, and rather than the immediate comfort.
Yeah, that's important. I mean, longevity is everything. And once you're able to make some money, figuring out, just as you said, what are those necessities? And then how can you apply the rest to prepare yourself for, those rainy days that are to come? Yeah. That's important. So is your network right now, in terms of, the work that you're doing in the animation world, is your network primarily in California, or do you have a bigger network? I ask just because, I'm sure there's lots of people on this call, who are definitely interested, and they might be thinking that, do I have to go to California? Is that the only place where, there's opportunity for me? So what are your thoughts on that?
It's primarily in California. I think because the animation industry is so small, Actually, one of the things that just happened, unfortunately, was Blue Sky Studios that did Ice Age. They just got shut down, and they've been around for a long time. But they were in Connecticut, and that was kind of the last place where there were people I knew who were not in California, and now they've all moved back to California. So it's just such a small pocket of the entertainment industry, because like other entertainment industries like Atlanta, like it kind of moves around based on where they get tax breaks. So like Atlanta is big for people in live action. Vancouver was big for a while, but California is really the hot spot for specifically for animation. So like almost all the studios except for Pixar are in Southern California. Pixar's in the Bay Area.
Okay.
So, but there are people I know who have, taken up jobs at small studios because they kind of got burnt out on the big studio thing, who went to Texas where they have places like, I think it's called Powerhouse Animation or Rock, or what's it called? I can't remember. But it's
something
like smaller. Yeah, smaller animation studios. But yeah, a lot of my network is out here. And then they're just like kind of scattered around, a couple people I know in other places.
Are smaller studios the same situation in which, everyone's hourly, or is the work relationship different with those smaller studios? Do you know?
It kind of depends. Like, you like a lot of the times at like a DreamWorks, the higher up positions end up being salaried. So like, eventually if I'm an assistant editor, and the kind of, it goes a second assistant editor, a first assistant editor, associate editor, and those are all hourly. And then the lead editor is finally when you're salaried, and it doesn't depend on your hours. You just kind of work whenever you want. So okay. Like the editor I work with, like I have to sign off at 6, so I don't charge overtime. He'll work until 9 if he wants to. But yeah.
Cool. All right, this is probably going to be my last question for you, and then I'll turn it over to our friends here in the audience. So thinking about, what you're doing now and all the work that you've done, and the classes that you took at STAMPS, and even the internship work that you did, what would you say are some things that you're like, either some classes you're definitely glad you took, or some side projects you're definitely glad you took the time to do? Because like you were saying before, school's definitely like that one step, but it's clear that there's definitely a lot more that you need to be doing on your own, or in other spaces. So how did that translate? Especially thinking about for any current students that are listening, what's the kind of work that they need to be putting in now while they're students, so that it'll pay off later for them?
Yeah, that's great. I was actually going to bring that up before. I'm glad you mentioned that. So it's funny how a couple of the classes that I really like, kind of like made me pull my hair out, were the ones I ended up using like the most in my career. So I took an After Effects class that was kind of like learning, well, it was sort of half After Effects, half learning like things like green screening and just video art. And it was just a really kind of mind-numbing class because you're learning the ins and outs of like software, and it's not like Photoshop, or Photoshop's really fun to play with. After Effects is like, unless you have the materials, you can't really like play with it. So you just have to sit there, take notes. And then the other one I did was, it was a documentary filmmaking class. And it was 7 to 10 p.m. Studio after on Thursday. So it was after this, or Tuesday, Thursday. So it was after the STAMPS lecture series, and it was in the snow, in the cold. So I'd have to go up there after dinner, sit there, and it was exhausting. But they both were classes where I learned editing, and I learned how to like video editing, especially for the documentary class, where our professor would have us kind of go make a documentary. Like we had 2 documentaries during the semester, and to shoot them ourselves, narrate them, or whatever, and then we'd have to edit everything ourselves as well. And it really helped to just kind of like be critical with my editing, and like look at, okay, why am I doing it this way? In the After Effects class, like when I was on Kipo, they said we somehow need to like make a title sequence, but we don't really have the money to do it yet. I was like, wait, I know After Effects, just let me try it. So eventually, like they would come to me with those kind of things, and I'd be able to kind of, that's why Kipo was so fun, is I was started to use all of those things I learned in school, it all started coming back. You know, I was like, oh, I know this program. I know how to do this. We can do it this way. I learned some, you know, sound work from doing classes with like an experimental animation and video classes. So I pretty much was like, you know, the thing with U of M that's ends up being really good is that you're kind of like a Swiss Army knife. You know, you just, even though you're not maybe like that tactical like knife, it's super sharp and really, you know, like you have a bunch of skills that are all like that all come into play. So I ended up really like being able to contribute in different ways that made my job really entertaining and really fun.
Nice. With specifically for After Effects and Premiere, did you end up like subscribing to those softwares on your own after you graduated, or were you like crash coursing it once you got the job to remind yourself on how to do those things?
Yeah, so I pretty much like wrote out my student subscription, you know, just like as much as I could. You know, I even used Maya as far as I could until like they shut it down because of my, which is the 3D program, you know, that does like animation and stuff. But as soon as that was done, I got the Adobe Creative Cloud when that came out, which, you know, for students, take advantage of that because you get a discount. I don't. But I mean, I use the Adobe suite, I think, every day. Even though like right now, my job, we use a different program that's not Adobe. I still use it we use it to update storyboards in Photoshop. We use it to take it into After Effects, add some effects on it and put it back in the project, you know? So I've ended up using the Creative Cloud nonstop and it's great. I love it.
Great. All right, let's take some questions. So I've got one. Coming from an interdisciplinary background, did you have to do any catching up to work in an animation studio with the CG or 2D specialty?
That's a good question. I think kind of related to what I was just talking about. It was one of those things where I realized that my education was coming into play. I don't know if I felt like I had to catch up necessarily, because like I think with editing, it's interesting how like animation, there's a technical side to it. And it's obviously creative, but you're learning like how a body moves and exaggerating that movement, and then you're doing a lot of computer stuff that's like you know, editing is much more like, do you have a good sense of rhythm? Do you have a good sense of tone? How to make a scene feel a certain emotion? How long to hold between dialogue to land a joke, that kind of thing. So a lot of that was kind of like, I always tell everybody who wants to get into animation, just watch a lot of movies. You know, like if you want to get editing, understand how different directors do different things. Some people move slow. Like I love Westerns, so like Clint Eastwood spaghetti Westerns. They're slow, really slow, like 3-hour long movies, but I love it because I think it's perfect for that kind of style of movie, like the desert. And then you have like Edgar Wright, who did like Baby Driver, Hot Fuzz, Shaun of the Dead, who's super quick, really funny. And I think just from studying that, I didn't feel like I had to catch up as much as just absorb, you know, just kind of absorb what I was being taught and absorb the movies I was watching, absorb the movies I was being told to watch from people at work. And what was the second part of that question?
No, I think you answered it.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, I think you answered it. All right, I've got one from Sharon. You mentioned earlier that storyboard art is a really tough job. Do you know any story artists? And if so, have you heard about any tips for making it in that sector or any common experiences?
Yeah, so, okay, so one thing I'm gonna plug this real quick. The guy I worked with on Kipo, he started an online, kind of like a small online school for specific like mediums in animation. So there's like directors who he worked with who are doing classes for storyboarding. He's got people who are doing illustration, you know, like a character design and illustration.
Nice.
I'm going to be doing an editing one later in the month. And I think like a lot of people have been, you know, like, again, it's always like continuing your education. So that was kind of the idea for him, was like anybody who wants to go deeper into a specific medium, he's offering that ability for like from people who are in the industry.
Nice.
But yeah, I mean, storyboarding is tough just because it's competitive. It's one of the more competitive jobs in the animation industry because it's the job, like the dream job of like someone who wants to be in animation, to be able to be drawing and building the story. But I would definitely look into that. And then again,
what is the name of it, or where can they find it?
it's called Rad How To Class.
Rad How To Class.
Yeah, so I can put it in the chat if that's okay.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Um,
And I will also just plug for Sharon, who asked that question. Our fourth episode, so Rich is number one, our fourth one with Brian Rhodes. He is a storyboard artist. So definitely tune into that one, and we'll be able to dive in deeper. You know, if storyboarding and being a story artist is something that you're really interested in, we'll be able to dig in deeper there.
Great.
Okay.
And that link I just sent, like a lot of those classes might be booked up, but they're new classes like every semester, whenever that, you know, they'll announce them. But anyway.
I love it. All right. This is a random one, but it's fun, so let's do it. Who's your favorite character from Kippo?
Okay. Favorite character from Kippo is Wolf. And if you don't know the show, she is the kind of tough, badass girl from who's lived on the surface her whole life after this apocalypse. She wears like a wolf hide on her head, and she's got this scorpion tail staff. She's a really great character because she's sort of the hardened, this kind of tough kid who's lived on the surface, and she's kind of the Kippo's best friend, but also kind of the opposite. She's not bubbly. She kind of doesn't understand a lot of things about human connection, but she ends up having one of the best arcs in the show. She's my favorite.
I love it. Have you had time to branch out on your own individual projects, or do animation with any smaller studios while you're at DreamWorks?
Yeah, so that's the thing, is that I could never really fully leave animation behind as like specifically animating, because I still enjoy doing it. And so there was a studio that a friend worked for that placed music and ads. They would like write music for ads. And so they asked me for their website to animate their story. So I did this like a 2.5, 3 minute thing where I animated like kind of a stylized animation of their story and how they, like, from their humble roots to like starting their business.
Nice.
Then I also just kind of pick up little fun projects. My mom wrote a kid's book, and I illustrated it. So we're working on that.
Nice.
And then
Go, Mom.
Yeah, right. And then I also worked with some friends who are making like card games where I just illustrate like some of the characters for their cards and things like that. So I try to keep up all those skills because I just, like, you know, those are the things I just enjoy doing. And, you know, those are kind of like, if it turns into any sort of, you know, monetary thing, that's great, but it's really more kind of for my sanity, you know, to kind of just continue to be creative outside of work, and to never really get complacent or like get to like, this is just my job, but this is more of a passion, you know.
I'm going to put my John hat on. Are you keeping up your website with this great side work that you're doing, sir?
I'm not, because nothing I've finished yet has been like released.
Oh, public? Oh, okay.
Yeah,
okay. So that's fair.
As soon as these things all are like kind of ready, because I also have like my editing reel that I want to put up, but I have to get approval from the studio, and all the shows I've worked on, they haven't given us approval yet. So like everything I have that I want to show people, I can't. But soon I will. Okay. Yeah. So yes, I will.
Gotcha. All right. As long as you're keeping up with it, so that's great. Okay, I've got a question from Dia. I had the chance to take a class with one of the background painters on Kippo, Wayne. And he mentioned some classes DreamWorks would offer for artists/employees to brush up their skills or learn new things. Have you taken any of those classes?
I haven't taken any of the classes, but because I was close with Rad on Kippo, he sent me kind of this is before he really launched all the classes. He sent me his like a class that he had done, and I kind of use that to like just kind of like scrub through and look at like how he storyboards. It was a storyboard class. So I haven't taken any, but I was planning on, it's one of my plans to learn storyboarding a little better, because it really does help my job. Because storyboarding, they have to know where to cut, you know, and I've always kind of wanted to learn storyboarding a little. You know, I've storyboarded my own little scenes before, from like DreamWorks properties, just for fun, to kind of like try it out and show people. But um, that's something I'd like to do. But other than that, I think I'm teaching one. It's like 90% there. It's not 100% confirmed yet.
Nice.
Yeah.
Okay. Another question here from Maggie. Loving these questions, everyone, by the way. Thank you. In terms of project timeline, do you have thoughts on the longer process of feature animation versus faster turnaround of TV/commercial work?
I've been thinking about that a lot, because I think that I've trying to identify why it is that I jumped into feature, because I think my brothers and I, we're all in the entertainment industry. My brother John actually works at DreamWorks as well, and my brother Hudson works at Paramount.
Oh,
and
wow.
yeah, so we're all
before or after you?
But after me, I was the oldest.
Okay.
They followed in my footsteps. But they
no pressure.
yeah. No, but the three of us have always been really passionate about working on movies and stories. So I've always wanted to work in feature. I will say though that I didn't expect how much I would love the fast pace of TV, like that kind of like going on to new projects. I think it kind of goes with what I was saying about like how I can't stop working on creative things. Like I always want to like, oh, what's the next thing? The next, kind of jumping into the next project. So it's been fun to like say, oh, I've worked on a Madagascar series. I've worked on Puss in Boots. I worked on Kipo, Jurassic World. It's fun to like jump around to those different projects. But the fun thing with feature animation is that you get to work really meticulously on one project for like 4 years, and then you get to see, like, obviously feature has more money. And so the movies are going to look bigger and better, have big actors, big score. And that's really one of the fun parts about it, is you get to see how like all those years culminates in a really great, sharp movie. So.
Very cool. We've got one from Sam. Are you allowed to use that unannounced work to other people within the industry when applying for jobs? Or do you have to just rely on your current portfolio alongside the good word of those in your network? Great question.
So yeah, I am, but I have an NDA, which is a non-disclosure agreement, which is where I say I'm not going to talk to other studios or other people about this project. I'm not, like, technically, legally, you're not even supposed to tell, like, your spouse, but nobody does that. So you can talk, it has to stay in the studio, basically. And that even applies for if you got let go, or if you like you can't, they can take legal action against you if you do. So you have to go based on what you've already worked on, as far as I know. I'm keeping my secrets. I don't want to DreamWorks on my back.
All right. You mentioned personal creative projects. Do you have plans on one day pitching your own show or art directing?
I would love to do that. So my brother John, he is the one he's the writer. He has all the ideas. He's constantly writing. He's really funny, and he kind of always has that creative, he has that story, he has that sense for story that I don't really have. I can help make a story, but he's the one that has the idea. So my brother Hudson and I are always like, John, what are you doing? We're waiting for you. It's like, we're waiting for you to, like, to make a show for us. But that way, we've always kind of, the three of us have a couple projects that we've been working on together that we would like to one day pitch to a studio. One of the interesting things with working, I'm not sure if it's like this everywhere, but DreamWorks, pretty much when you sign your name that you're going to work with them, they own all of your ideas first. Like, they get the first dibs. So you have to, if you have an idea, you come to them first. And if they say no, then you can shop it around to other studios.
Interesting.
So like my brother, he had an idea. He's working on a live action short film. And even though it's an animation studio, he still had to pitch it to them. And they'd say, okay, you can take it. But we would love to do that one day. Yeah.
I look forward to seeing that. That would be awesome.
Yeah.
Very cool. All right. I'm going to do a last call for any other questions. And in the meantime, while I wait to see if there's any other last ones, like I said, big advocate, for art business and art education, but also mentorship. If you're in this room and Rich's story aligns with something that you're seeing for yourself, or something that you're hoping to get into, get in contact with them. Rich, are you good with us sharing your email address?
Yeah, please. I'm more than happy to talk to anybody. Just send me an email if you're willing to do a call. That's usually the best if we can work that out, just because it's easier to communicate. But I will try to get back to you as soon as possible if you are interested in talking animation, or you want to kind of get some more feedback or whatever it is. I would be more than happy to do that.
I love
my brother.
Which sibling is your favorite?
That's my other brother, Hudson.
Question, Hudson.
Yeah. Definitely John.
I love it. I love it. Rich, this was great. Thank you so much. I'm going to honor everyone's time. And this has been awesome. Thank you for sharing. Everyone definitely, like I said, if this is a route or a journey or a path of yours that you are interested in, definitely, his email address is in the chat. Reach out, ask a question that maybe you didn't think of right now or that you have later. Whatever it may be. A lot of the things that are going to take you from where you are to where you want to go is just courage, and being willing to put in that work, put yourself out there, get the feedback that you need just to move yourselves forward as well. John, do we want to talk about the survey? We'd love to hear some feedback from you all. So we'll be sending out a survey to everyone that registered. Do we want to drop the link in the chat too, or?
So I already put together a message
cool.
that I will send when we wrap things up here. And Rich, thank you so much for all that you do. You're just so wonderful. Thank you. And Stephanie Yeh, thank you for kicking us off in our inaugural From Here to There. As Stephanie mentioned, this is a series, and we will have 3 more of these. And obviously, you all know I'm relentless, so I will keep pitching and promoting in email. And please, everybody who's here today from the STAM School, tell your friends how amazing this was. It has been recorded. So obviously at some point we're going to disseminate a way to access the recording. But if any of your friends need to access it before then, obviously it lives on my desktop until then.
And you can also register for any of the other upcoming sessions. Rich, you might be interested in the next one and the 4th one in particular. So our next one is going to be with Yasmin Ector. She graduated not too long ago, actually, and she's working at Nick Jr. And then just because it's associated to what we talked about today with Rich, our 4th session is also going to be with a storyboard artist and art director, also in the California area, Brian Rhodes. So be sure to sign up, register for those events now, and tell your friends, please.
Yay. All right, guys, thank you so much. Round of applause for these amazing people.
Thanks,
and his family, his brothers, his mom.
Thanks, Patty.
And everybody have a good night. Thanks.
Good night.